In several countries around the world, it is a fact that if a person has money and influence, it is unlikely that they will be imprisoned for a crime they committed, no matter how serious. However, in a few countries in the world, it doesn't matter if you are poor, rich, or someone very influential. If you commit a crime, you will pay. And that's exactly what happened to Truong My Lan, a Vietnamese billionaire who was sentenced to death for the crime of financial fraud. Hello everyone, how are all of you doing? Welcome back to my YouTube channel. And in today's video, I am going to discuss the case of the billionaire Vietnamita who has been given the death penalty due to her involvement in a major financial fraud. So, without further ado, let's get into the video. Truong was born on October 13, 1956 in Ho Chi Minh City, also known as Saigon, the most populous city in Vietnam with a population of over 9 million. Her family is from China and migrated to Vietnam in the 1950s. Truong started working at a young age with her mother. The two went out on the streets selling cosmetics to anyone interested and also had a stall at a fair to sell these same products. Over time, the family managed to save good money. And in 1986, when the Vietnamese government launched the reform plan called Doi Moi, the family saw a great opportunity. To summarize what Doi Moi was about, I will try to give a quick explanation here as the subject is quite complex. Vietnam is a communist country, and before the reform it was prohibited for people to found companies to provide services, manufacture, or sell anything. Only what they called a family business was tolerated, and the family couldn't hire anyone from outside to work with them. Everything had to be in the family, literally. As Vietnam was facing a major crisis, with unemployment, hunger, and misery spreading throughout the country, the communist government saw that it had no other way out than to let people open companies, generate capital, and hire people to make the economy run. Of course, all of this would still be controlled by the government, and in addition to strict supervision, for the person to be able to open the company, it would have to be evaluated by a type of government council. Anyway, after the reform, Vietnam took an economic leap forward, and many families became rich, and Truong's family was one of them. As soon as the reform was approved, Truong's family went through government advice, and with the savings they had saved over the previous years, they began purchasing various plots of land and properties across the country. The family dove headfirst into the real estate business, and in just a few years, in the 90s, they had assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They got rich so quickly because when they bought several lands and properties, countless foreign businessmen, many from China, Europe, and the United States, bought these same properties from them for a much higher value than they had purchased. As Vietnam had kind of embraced capitalism and opened its doors to investment from abroad, many foreigners saw a huge opportunity in the country and started buying Vietnamese properties. Truong's family benefited greatly from this and became one of the richest families in the country. Furthermore, the family had connections with numerous politicians with varying degrees of power, something that helped them a lot in their business. Yes, this is corruption, and this is a problem that Vietnam, like most third world countries, face. That is how it was when Vietnam approved the Doi Moi reform. A great amount of money started circulating in the country, whether through domestic or foreign investments. Seeing this, politicians wanted a piece of the pie and began making deals with those who paid the most. And Truong's family paid very generously. Today, Vietnam combats the practice of corruption with severe penalties, and it is something that we will see later in the video. In the family, Truong was the one who stood out the most, whether because of her broad vision or because of her ambition that ended up turning into greed. In 1992, she met a Hong Kong investor named Eric, whom she ended up marrying and having 2 daughters. Around this same time, Truong became chairman of the board of the large company founded by his family, Van Thin Phat. This company, in addition to being focused on the real estate sector, with several luxury residential buildings, offices, hotels, and shopping centers, is also focused on financial services. Today, the company is linked to some of central Ho Chi Minh City's most valuable properties, including the resplendent 39-story Times Square Saigon, the 5-star Windsor Plaza Hotel, the 37-story Capitol Place office building, and the 5-star Sherwood Residence Hotel. The latter was Truong's home for many years. In 2011, Truong obtained government permission to merge 3 small banks into a single bank that became one of the largest banks in Vietnam, Saigon Commercial Bank. As she was very influential and was one of the creators of the merger of these banks, she was in control of the Commercial Bank of Saigon for 10 years from 2012 to 2022. At this point, Truong and his family's fortune was so large that the income in the bank alone, without them doing anything, was more than $10 million per month. That's right, just by breathing, by existing, their money was generating over $10 million monthly. You must be thinking, wow, 1% of that amount would already be great for me. I've already sorted out my life. I'm sure that most people in the world would live very well with just 1% of that fortune and would still be very grateful. But not Truong. Despite all the fortune she already had, which was more than enough for her to live a luxurious life until her 10th generation, she wanted more. Remember when I said that the Truong family was the most notable, that in addition to a broader vision, it also stood out for its ambition that turned into greed? Well then, it was precisely her greed that sealed her fate. For starters, Vietnam's laws do not allow a single person to own more than 5% of the shares of any bank in the country. I don't know exactly why this law exists, but I suppose it is to prevent one person from having too much power over a bank, since a bank is a financial institution that exerts a lot of influence on society and consequently on people's lives. Therefore, even though she was one of the creators of the merger of 3 small banks and one of the founders of the Commercial Bank of Saigon, Truong could not have more than 5% of the shares in this bank. But the woman is smart and found a way to circumvent the law. First, she created hundreds of shell companies with fake people's names. Afterwards, as she was in maximum control of the Commercial Bank of Saigon, in this case, she was a kind of president. She appointed a lot of people she trusted to high positions in the institution. This, according to authorities, gave Truong more than 90% of the bank's controlling stake, and she could only have 5%, as I already mentioned. Afterwards, the woman gave orders to the same people she gave positions at the bank and who were her trust, so that they approved loans that were requested for her shell companies. As her company was a shell company and was in the name of an outsider, the company simply closed its doors and did not pay the loan. Thus, she kept all the money for herself and passed some of it on to her associates who helped her with the scheme. The amounts she managed to subtract from the bank with this scheme are absurd. Just to give you an idea, loans intended for shell companies corresponded to 93% of all the bank's loans. According to prosecutors, over a 3-year period starting in February 2019, she ordered her private driver to withdraw 108 trillion Vietnamese dong, which is more than $4 billion if converted at today's exchange rate. This value is greater than the annual GDP of 2 Brazilian states. All this money withdrawn by the private driver was stored in cash in the basement of one of her mansions. Yeah, I remembered him too. That amount of money, even if it were all in the highest denomination notes in the currency of Vietnam, would weigh 2 tons. Well, of course, this wasn't going to last forever, and she ended up being discovered. Truong My Lan was arrested on October 6, 2022, after years of investigation by the authorities. She was accused of various financial crimes, and besides her, several other people were also arrested. According to authorities, the total count of individuals participating in the scheme is close to 100, which encompasses Truong's spouse and her niece. Furthermore, according to authorities altogether, the woman along with her accomplices managed to embezzle over $12 billion. Truong's financial crime had great repercussions in Vietnam and caused great outrage among the local population. Many said that the country is one of the most unequal in the world, And while a large part of the population does not have housing or even anything to eat, Truong, who was already a billionaire, set up an entire criminal scheme to further increase her fortune. On March 5, 2024, Truong's trial began at the Ho Chi Minh City People's Court. Truong was found guilty of several crimes, such as fraud, embezzlement, bribery, and conspiracy for financial gain. On April 11, 2024, his sentence was handed down. Truong, then 67 years old, was sentenced to death by lethal injection. The others involved in the scheme received sentences ranging from 3 years to life in prison. Truong's husband and her niece were sentenced to 9 and 17 years in prison, respectively. This is considered one of the biggest corruption scandals in all of Southeast Asia. Experts say that the severe penalty given to everyone involved in the scheme for even the smallest participation is a clear message from the Vietnamese government in the fight against corruption. It is not yet known when Truong's execution date will be. During her trial, her haggard and disheveled appearance is visible, something that contrasts sharply with the glamorous publicity photos people have seen of her in the past. This is the clear result of how greed can destroy a person.
Well, so that's it. Thank you very much for watching me until the end, and I'll see you in the next video.